And today's election results are rolling in. The majority of Louisianans voted no on all 4 constitutional amendments on the ballot. The first one would have given the state Supreme Court the ability to discipline out-of-state lawyers for unethical practices in Louisiana. It also would have given the state legislature the power to form new courts that only handled specific types of cases. With today's result, that will not change, and the Louisiana Attorney Disciplinary Board will keep the authority to discipline out-of-state lawyers. Likewise, 64% of voters rejected a controversial amendment that would have capped the income tax rate at 3.75%, a bump up from 3%. It also would have kept a temporary pay bump for some public school teachers, among other changes. And the majority of the state decided not to approve a controversial amendment that would have changed how juveniles are charged for serious crimes. It would have allowed lawmakers to expand the list of crimes juveniles between ages 14 and 16 can be charged as an adult for, without voter approval. And the current guidelines will now stay in place. And finally, 63% of Louisianans voted against an amendment that would have given the state the ability to fill empty judicial positions at the earliest election date. With the overwhelming no votes, the current guidelines on filling judicial vacancies, they will stay in place. In Jefferson Parish, the race for Council District 1 was just too close, so it's heading to a runoff election. Republican Timothy Kerner Jr. and Democrat Andrea Manuel both received 36% of votes. Manuel received less than 100 votes more than Kerner, so the race will head to a runoff. But joining us now to talk about these results, WWL Louisiana political analyst, my friend Clancy Dubos. Welcome back. We want to jump right into these amendments. Right. Now, this was something that the governor was pushing for. What does this mean, this rejection from the people on these 4 amendments?
Well, it's not a rejection of Jeff Landry per se, not by any means. In fact, if Amendment 2, which was the big one, that was the most controversial one, it would have rewritten the entire Article 7 of the Louisiana Constitution, which is all about taxation and revenue. It was a lot, 115 pages long. And I think if it had passed, it would have been an epic victory for Landry. Right. Its failure is not necessarily an epic defeat. He's still the governor. And in fact, there's a template for the roadmap ahead for Landry. Back in 1988 or 89, I was actually covering politics. And Governor Buddy Roemer at that time proposed something similar, a massive all-in-one omnibus rewrite of tax articles in the Constitution. It was too much then, just as it was too much now. The voters said no back then. Governor Roemer and the legislature came back, and over the course of the following 2 to 5 years, voters wound up approving in smaller formats pieces of that big package, and they wound up putting into the Constitution 80 to 90% of what was in there, but they wanted to be able to think about it one piece at a time. And so I think what voters were saying to the governor today was, look, we're not against fiscal reform, we're not against lowering the income tax rate, we're not necessarily against a lot of these other changes, but we want to get all of it right rather than all of it right now. And there was no fiscal cliff hanging over everybody's head, so there was no need to do it all right now. So if the governor wants to step back and start breaking it down, I think he could get a lot of these changes over time put into the Constitution.
All right, well, we didn't see a traditional organized effort
against
it, right? Yeah. So what do you think pushed voters to say no on all 4 of these amendments?
Well, the governor had an organized traditional campaign on traditional mainstream media, lots of TV and radio ads. There was none of that kind of opposition to it, but there was massive opposition on social media, which means that was a ground up. The governor's campaign was a top-down approach, which is a traditional approach in campaigns. But here, you had 4 different amendments, each of which had a pocket of engaged opposition. And to make sure they got their one voted down, they all said, not necessarily in an organized fashion, it's not like somebody was coordinating all this, but they all said, let's just vote against all of them. And I've seen over the past half century that I've been covering politics in Louisiana, when voters are not sure on amendments, they vote no. And that's what happened today.
And then finally, we have just a little bit of time left. the JP race, that was a very contentious race. What
Yes.
did you make of it?
Well, I call that a kitchen sink race. Two of the candidates, Ricky Template and Tim Kerner Jr., threw everything but the kitchen sink at each other. And
Right.
a very nasty campaign.
I was
And
gonna
what
say, it got
struck me
heated.
about this, very heated. There were lawsuits and charges and countercharges. But the irony of this is that Kerner, who was part of a political dynasty that goes back 50 years, was able to convince voters that he's the fresh face. You know, he's young, so he looked fresh. And Ricky Template has been involved for a couple of decades, maybe 3 decades, in politics and community stuff. And so sometimes when voters are ready for a change, they just are ready for a change. It's not necessarily saying we think this is a bad person, but that's the way politics works. And now it goes through a runoff on May 3rd.
Right, so it'll be Manuel against Kerner.
The Democrat against the Republican. The demographics favor the Republican, but on an off election like this, it'll be the only thing on the ballot. In most places, anything could happen. That's the second Saturday of Jazz Fest as well.
Right. So yeah, we got to see.
Who knows what the turnout will be?
Who knows what the turnout will be?